Hey y'all, tonight I'm excited for part 3 of Evolutionary Biology Misconceptions with Dr. J. Bundy. Tonight we're going to be talking about we're going to be talking about, oh my goodness, it went right out of my head and I didn't have it down. We're going to talk with Jay and he'll tell us what it's going to be about. So sit back, buckle up, and let's get to the sunny spot on Skeptic Haven.
Jefferson laid great stress on it. It wasn't enough, he said, to enshrine some rights in a constitution or a Bill of Rights. The people had to be educated, and they had to practice their skepticism and their education. Otherwise, we don't run the government. The government runs us.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Fatalism.
Yes, fatalism.
Fatalism. Yes, there we go.
Look, yeah, I got
feel
distracted.
Too. A whole philosophical conversation. So
I'm excited for that.
I'm getting into my philosophy bag. Don't tell anybody.
Everyone, hey, everyone's gonna know about it. It's gonna be the most viral thing now with my intro.
Yes, that's a good teaser, though. You really got to wait till the other side of the intro to figure out what's going on.
Oh well, it is what it is. That's the worst thing that happens in this show. I think.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, we've all dealt with much worse.
So how have you been since you were on here last?
I've been good. We started the Black Free Thinker show on Monday, so people should definitely go check that out. I continue to do streams on my channel, Pocket Locker 86. Come over and sub if you want to hang out and see my other shows. But yeah, I'm really excited about Black Free Thinkers. The first episode went really well. And so, yeah, we've been working on that and getting ready to move and start a new job. So been busy.
Wow, that is a lot. Yeah. That sure is a lot. Okay, so let's talk about this fatalism.
Yeah.
What is this? What is this topic? What are you, for those who aren't
So
philosophy,
we're definitely going to get into it, but it's definitely just what I consider to be the conventional view about evolutionary thinking, just sort of people, thinking that evolution is sort of predictable and that it sort of leads inevitably to certain outcomes. And really understanding how that is distinct from Darwinian evolution and why Darwinian evolution represents a radical theory. That's really what we're going to be trying to talk about, is trying to get people to understand why Darwin's theory of evolution is considered a radical theory. And to me, it's all tied to the fact that he was counteracting this idea of evolutionary fatalism.
Okay.
So,
okay, cool.
Yeah.
So really quickly, what got you started down this path?
My dissertation research. So my dissertation research is about contingency, like historical contingency, basically just what evolutionary paths or outcomes are even available to a population depend on its history, both in terms of its genetic lineage, like what it inherits, and then also in terms of the history of the environment and selection in the environment. And so the sort of opportunities and constraints that creates. And I think that when you study a process like that really closely, you realize that you're studying a unique aspect of evolutionary theory that sometimes people don't realize how much this applies to life. So one of my colleagues, Zach Blount, who actually will come up in this, he sends us out some like wonderful, crazy emails. But he likes to tell, stories, because his work's about contingency too, about how, a wrong turn here or an accident there actually radically transformed human history, you know, like
Hmm.
this, you know, the prince, they were trying to assassinate him and he went down the wrong street, you know, and that saved him. But then somebody else found him on this other, you know, like just these crazy things. And so people don't often think about that. Like you'll hear a story like, you know, how your grandparents met or something. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, oh, we went to some dance and one of them was visiting a relative from out of town or whatever. And they met and they started. And it's like this chance meeting. And like, you don't realize, but like you would not be here if it wasn't for that little chance event. And it's really unpredictable whether or not something like that happens. And it's also unpredictable what the consequences and the results are. And it really makes you realize, just when thinking about life in general, sort of that there's no putting the genie back in the bottle, you know?
Mm-hmm. That's right. Okay, so I have so many thoughts now. My head's kind of spinning a little bit. So when I hear the term fatalism, I think of a negative, but what you seem to be talking about, it's not a negative.
No, it is a negative. Yeah.
Okay, it is.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the distinction being fatalism in terms of thinking that the evolutionary process is inherently leading to some outcome, that there's a undetermined fate and that we're headed towards that fate. That's the fatalism. The actual contingency aspect is, no, it's not some predetermined fate. It literally depends on what actually happens.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I got you.
Yes.
Yeah. I think I was getting switched around in my head a little bit.
Yeah. No. That makes a lot of sense. I'm glad we cleared that up.
Yeah. Okay. So where do you want to go first with this?
I'll just go through I'll start the slideshow and you can just let me know if you want to jump in, and if people are, you know, putting interesting questions in the chat, then I can stop for those, or you know, take questions after, whatever works.
All right. So I will just bring in your screen there.
All right. So the title is Wonderful Lie, The Radical's Guide to Evolutionary Fatalism. And all of those words are meaningful. So for those that may be familiar with the holiday movie, It's a Wonderful Life, that is about contingency, right? It's like this person is, you know, they're depressed, and there's like like an angel or something that comes and shows them like, oh, if you weren't here, here's how all of these other people's lives would be different, right? And it's kind of showing him the contingency of his existence, that he was in fact important because he made a difference. And so when Stephen Jay Gould wrote his sort of opus magnum on historical contingency and evolution, it was called Wonderful Life. And we'll be making reference to that book, and we'll be talking about how Stephen Jay Gould and Darwinian evolution both address this concept of evolutionary fatalism. And so that's why this is titled Wonderful Lie. And the Radical's Guide, like I said, we'll be talking about evolutionary fatalism, and we'll also be talking about how, like I said, the radical elements of Darwin's theory. So like why it was a radical theory. So hopefully you will feel fully justified in all of this when we get to the end of our journey. All right. And so we'll start with Stephen Jay Gould and his famous thought experiment called Replaying Life's Tape. And it says, we live in a world of good news and bad news. The good news is that we can specify an experiment to decide between the conventional and radical interpretations of extinction, thereby settling the most important question we can ask about the history of life. The bad news is that we can't possibly perform the experiment. I call this experiment Replaying Life's Tape. You press the rewind button and making sure you thoroughly erase everything that actually happened. Go back to any time and place in the past, say to the seas of the Burgess Shale, then let the tape run again and see if the repetition looks at all like the original. If each replay strongly resembles life's actual pathway, then we must conclude that what really happened pretty much had to occur. But suppose that the experimental versions all yield sensible results strikingly different from the actual history of life, what could we then say about the predictability of self-conscious intelligence, or of mammals, or vertebrates, or of life on land, or simply of multicellular persistence for 600 million difficult years?
Wow,
All right.
that says a lot right there.
It does. It does. And he's starting to outline it, right? He's saying if we were to replay the tape of history over and over and over again, and each time it pretty much looked like the universe we know and love, then we'd have to conclude that, it doesn't matter what happens. Anytime you do it, evolution's always going to go down the same path. But he says, but what if it's really different each time, right? And so that starts to set us up. And so I call this the gospel according to Gold. But what is this thought experiment really about? It sounds to me like some sort of weird paleontologist fantasy. What do you mean replay the tape of life? It sounds like something you think up as a professor one day after you've had too much for lunch and you're trying to avoid dozing off before going to your next lecture. Of course, when you have a fantasy after hours, that's your own business. But if it's on the clock, well, that's a thought experiment. So what is this conventional view? What is the radical alternative? And how can he claim that this fantasy can settle the most important question about the history of life? Let's start by trying to understand the conventional view. But first, I'd like to take a bit of a detour that is actually quite important. So to avoid copyright issues, we're not going to play this brief clip because it's from a TED Talk. But this is indeed a TED Talk from Daniel Dennett, may he rest in peace, recently left us. And he is giving a TED Talk and he quotes a guy named Michael Denton, who is a creationist, who is quoted in Pastor Rick Warren's book, The Purpose-Driven Life.
Oh my goodness. I just have to say that's practically next to the Bible in the parts that I live in.
Yes.
I'm so sick of seeing that thing.
Rick Warren is a very popular pastor. And yes, this book, The Purpose-Driven Life, was like, I don't know, like if people understand, it's like gonzo, crazy Christian bestseller. And so this quote is, all the evidence available in the biological sciences supports the core proposition that the cosmos is a specially designed whole with life and mankind as its fundamental goal and purpose, a whole in which all facets of reality have their meaning and explanation in this central fact. And so this really jumped out at me because he's saying all the evidence available in the biological sciences supports this core proposition. And so Daniel Dennett also has a quote: every time you say it, you make another copy in your head. Every time you say it, you make another copy in your head. And so these words are also by the same gentleman. I believe many are familiar with Daniel Dennett. He's the author of Darwin's Dangerous Idea, and he's quoting Michael Denton from the book, The Purpose-Driven Life by Pastor Rick Warren. Some of you may be surprised to hear this, but sometime before I became a graduate student in evolutionary biology, I worked as a youth minister and community organizer at a Reformed church in Newark, New Jersey. Not only did I read The Purpose-Driven Life, I also read Pastor Warren's book, Counterfeit Gods, in a single day. I quite enjoyed both books. Here's another fact that may surprise you. I 100% believed in evolution during that time of life, just as I do today. Today, it would be tempting to dismiss this statement as a theologically inspired pastoral claim that may happen to be incidentally a little bit unscientific, so perhaps we should just move on. I believe that would be a mistake. First and foremost, all genuine claims about human nature deserve to be treated with respect and taken seriously, but more importantly, I'd be wrong to do so because this is a scientific claim, right? It is a claim about the evidence. Beyond that, I hope to show that it's a scientific claim that is consistent with what Gold and others would refer to as the conventional interpretation of natural history. In other words, it's a scientific claim with an important past in the history of science that we need to understand if we're to address it appropriately. So let's talk about the conventional view. You had a question up there.
No, actually, I just had Yeah, it was just a comment I thought was kind of
Oh,
funny.
had the purpose-driven life. Yes. Basset Hound ate it. What's her purpose? Awesome. I love that.
I
All
love
right.
that. I love
So
it.
let's talk about presuppositions of this conventional view. This is really sort of the three cornerstones of the conventional view. First is progress. And again, these are going to be claims about natural history. So primitive or older organisms are deemed simpler and thus somehow inferior to more recent, quote unquote, highly evolved organisms. Natural history thus records this progress through geological time, and it implies a natural hierarchy, right? There are steps, right? Over time, you're going up and up, and you're getting higher towards higher levels, increasing complexity. That it's directed, that this natural history records change in a particular, more or less linear path towards a particular end. In other words, that the steps unfold in an orderly fashion. And also that is predictable. The processes underlying natural history suggest a peculiar reliability that infer a certain inevitability of certain outcomes, particularly the emergence of Homo sapiens or something like it. All roads lead to anthropogenesis, or becoming human. And so these are these core, this is the things when we talk about this conventional, this is view of evolution, this is what we mean, that it's a process that records progress, that it is directed, and that it is predictable. All right, and this brings us to what I call the iconography of progress, or idolatry, right? These are the paraphernalia that we have used to reinforce these bad ideas. So this is called the Great Chain of Being by Dodicus, and it's from Rhetorica Christiani. It's from, as you can see, the 1500s. And it's the chain of being is depicted as a hierarchy with the deity above entirely spiritual beings, which you might call angels, who are in turn above humans, who sit atop a hierarchy of plants and animals, right? And so you have this idea of God's at the top, and you have supernatural beings and humans, and we sit atop this natural order, and you go down, animals are above plants, who are above grasses, and all this type of nonsense. All right, so that is the iconography of progress. So that's the Great Chain of Being. Here's another one. It's called the March of Progress. This is probably, a lot of you have seen this image before. This is like the prototypical image of evolution a lot of times that you find. It's actually called the Road to Homo sapiens, but it's more colloquially known as the March of Progress. And it's the full version of Rudolf Zollinger's The Road to Homo sapiens is up top. You see that sort of above the fold. And there's the folded version, and it's from a magazine that was called Early Man. And you can notice how the folded version exaggerates an apparent linear progression. This type of depiction is inconsistent with the branching nature of evolutionary relationships. So there were sort of two misconceptions that this thing did. One was sort of, you can see the linear progress, whereas if you look above, even if you are just doing this simple erectness height thing, it goes up and then down, it's wavy. And instead, what we get in the folded version is very much linear. It's really important to notice that the artist wasn't actually erroneously depicting things. They were just taking certain specimens and like highlighting them and like showing where they would have been at sort of in the time series. And you can actually see the branching pattern if you look in the bars above the images, right? So they're actually doing something accurate. Just nobody ever pays attention to that. And so instead we just get caricatures of that folded version, right? And that's what leads to this idea about the March of Progress. And so there's two things about this. One is that it really doesn't depict the branching nature of evolution. It branches, it doesn't go into a line. And then two, it also sort of erroneously depicts these as ancestral forms, that we're saying that they're directly descended from one another. And that's also not true, nor is it what the artist intended to depict. But nevertheless, this has become iconography of the conventional view of evolution.
We do have a question really quickly.
So we go from ascension to descent, turning the chain of being on its side. And so here we have a guy named David J. Depew. He wrote a book. He's quoting John Dewey. And he said, Dewey saw evidence of the incompleteness of and active resistance to the Darwinian revolution in the recrudescence of absolutistic philosophies that pay lip service to Darwinian evolution by turning on its side the great chain of being with its hierarchically ordered ranks of essentially defined types ranging from monad to man, and watching it unfold in time. So what he's saying is the Darwinian revolution is not complete, and actually people are actively resisting it. And what they're doing is they're trying to pretend they're now thinking in terms of naturalistic evolution, but what they're really doing is they're taking that great chain of being, they're turning it on its side, right? And that's how you get from this to this, right? That's what he's noticing. He's saying you went from this and now you're doing this, and you think that that's what's happening, and that's not what's happening. Sorry, I hope that was clear. I messed up.
Yeah, that was
there.
Really quickly. Right. We do have.
So let's talk about what Stephen Jay Gould thinks is more accurate and how he addresses this. So he also talks about the way we think about phylogenies and depict phylogenies, and he talks about the cone of increasing diversity versus the bottom model, which is called decimation in diversification. So Gould's depiction of the conventional view as a cone of increasing diversity, which he contrasts to his own view of decimation and diversification based on his analysis of the Burgess shell fauna. Gould's view is distinguished by a much broader array of forms, which he calls disparity, most of which are exclusive to lineages annihilated by extinction. And so if you look at the cone, it sort of implies that we come from very few lineages, and over time, simpler forms have developed and diversified, and as they've continued to evolve into more complex forms. And so you get sort of, we started with very few forms, and then we diversified into a wide array of forms. And Gould is saying, no, actually, that's not true. There was historically a huge wide array of forms. It's just that most of those lineages went extinct, and the tree of life, as we know, is the result of sort of diversification within the few branches that remained. And importantly, to his view about contingency, those lineages would have been surviving due to chance factors. It wasn't because they were superior or they were better adapted to the environment. It was because they were in the right place and didn't get crushed in an earthquake, or they survived some sort of tidal event or something like that, right? He's saying it's chance. It's not their fit to the environment that made certain lineages better than others. Matter of fact, they weren't better. They just were lucky. And so now he's going to contrast his view with the cone. And he says, the fatuous idea of a single order amidst the multifarious diversity of modern life flows from our conventional iconographies and the prejudices that nurture them, the ladder of life and the cone of increasing diversity. By the latter, horseshoe crabs are judged as simple. By the cone, they are deemed old. And one implies the other under the grand conflation. Down the ladder also means old, while low on the cone denotes simple. I don't think that any particular secret, mystery, or inordinate subtlety underlies the reason for our allegiance to these false iconographies of ladder and cone. They are adopted because they nurture our hopes for a universe of intrinsic meaning defined in our own terms. All right, pop quiz. I always tell my students, this is the best argument against authority I can think of, which is that you can never trust instructors. These people are always hiding pop quizzes and they'll just emerge out of anywhere. All right, but this is a clip from a debate where Christopher Hitchens was debating Al Sharpton. And of course, as you can imagine, Christopher Hitchens is representing an anti-theistic position, and Al Sharpton is the pro-God candidate here. But I want you to listen to what he says. All right, here we go.
Science, to me, does not wipe away the existence of God, because science had to start somewhere. So to pick up mankind in its evolving state does not tell me where mankind began, how it became a long story of ordered steps. Well, who ordered them? Why do things follow such a natural progression? Who set the progress?
Right. And did you guys hear it?
Yeah.
Right. Right. You hear about the ordered steps, you hear about the progress, who ordered the steps, and of course, the whole of the history of evolution is the story of the emergence of man, right? And so that's the conventional view. And so, let me go next here. Oops, what are we doing?
Science.
There we go. All right. So yeah, so I'm glad you guys could hear that. And what I hope you can hear now, right, is that even though you might hear people say something like that and think, oh, like that's clearly a religious argument that they're making. Yes, they might be creationist in that regard. But this is an idea that has history in natural history, right? And they're taking a particular interpretation of the natural history. And so I call this wonderful lie, the fateful mutation. And so I start with this original quote. All the evidence available in the biological sciences supports the core proposition that the cosmos is a specially designed whole with life and mankind as its fundamental goal and purpose, a whole in which all facets of reality have their meaning and explanation in this central fact. And if you realize this is about natural history, you can just take that R in the word core, give it a little mutation, make that R and N, and you can imagine Stephen Jay Gould arguing against this, saying what they're saying is all the evidence available in the biological sciences supports the cone proposition that the cosmos is a specially designed whole with life and mankind as its fundamental goal and purpose, a whole in which all facets of reality have their meaning and explanation in this central fact. So that is the setup. That is why I call this the wonderful lie. All right. So here we go. Sorry, I had to get my mouse. Here we go. All right. So let's now talk about Darwin's dangerous idea. So in the year 2000, a celebration was held in honor of Stephen Jay Gould for contributing over 300 articles to the publication Natural History. Gould himself gave the keynote address. You can find it on YouTube if you search for Stephen Jay Gould plus Evolution Revolution. It's a real treat because if you read scientific literature, you rarely get to see and hear the scientist in person. It's a great shame the way the dutiful work of most scientists has the unfortunate side effect of hiding from public consumption the tremendous personalities of some of our greatest thinkers. I hope you do consider spending some more time with Dr. Gould, who left us an overwhelming body of work, and he was quite a character. That's to say nothing of the extraordinarily complex man, Charles Darwin. Anyway, during his speech, Gould indeed aims to impress upon his audience the truly radical nature of Darwin's theory. I will do neither justice, but let's give it a shot. So he starts off with Darwin's dangerous idea. One of the most interesting aspects of Darwin's life and the most revealing is that he developed the theory of natural selection in pretty much its complete form in 1838. And he didn't publish until 1859. That's one of the longest standing puzzles in Darwinian scholarship. Why does he delay 21 years? The old heroic explanation that he was just collecting his facts, he didn't want to jump the gun, that simply can't be right. It must have been fear and not just mere collection. I don't think fear of exposing evolution, it's not that heretical a view, but of exposing the radical content of his own take on evolution. And so this is coming from Stephen Jay Gould's speech, Evolution Revolution. I don't know what happened to my background here. Oh, well. All right, so here we have three statues you can see that we're going to talk a little about. So we have Copernicus, which is in Krakow, Poland. We have a statue of Galileo in Florence, Italy, and a statue of Darwin from the Natural History Museum in London, England. All right, so before we move on, so this is really big because what Gould says is that the Darwinian revolution was an unparalleled revolution because It was about our place in the natural world. And he calls this real estate versus essence. When you look at the Copernican revolution, the idea that the earth revolved around the sun and not vice versa, that's just about real estate, right? That's just about redrawing the map. But when you talk about the origin of species, that is really our essence, because now you're talking about origin. You're talking about where we come from and how we came to be. And he says this is the much bigger revolution. This is the one that was much more difficult for people to accept because it wasn't just about real estate.
Mm.
All right. So before we move on to talking about let's talk about a few things that you might be surprised to hear, I have to say, cannot be the radical elements of Darwin's theory. If we're to hold Dr. Gould to task about this claim that Darwin's theory is indeed radical, we're going to need some convincing. So let's clear a couple things up. Darwin's theory can't be radical because it's a theory of evolution. I will repeat that. Darwin's theory can't be radical because it's a theory of evolution. There were lots of evolutionists, not only during Darwin's time, but the idea has deep roots going back to much earlier scientists. It can't be any of the basic elements of the theory. It can't be having a theory of adaptation, for instance. People were perfectly comfortable with the fit between organisms and their environments, wonderfully suited for their way of life. That's not it. It can't be about having a theory of variation. Everybody accepted that there's variation in populations. Doesn't take a radical genius to figure that out. Okay, well, what about inheritance? It feels a little bit embarrassing to even say this, but it is an essential element of the theory. But nope, that can't be it. Obviously, everyone accepts theories of inheritance in various modes of reproduction. It's also not a theory. It's also not about natural selection. There have been natural selectionists going back to ancient times, just as there were scientific creationists going back to ancient times, although a lot of them were pagan. History's weird like that. All right. We're just trying to be even-handed, so let's actually get into what's radical about his theory. And so according to Gould, there are three radical elements about Darwin's theory. The first is the radical nature of the theory itself, and that is what it says specifically about adaptation. Number two, what it says about variation. And number three, what it says about historicity. And so the radical nature of the theory itself, in other words, what it says about adaptation, is that it's not progressive. The first element concerns the radical nature of the theory itself. Darwin's theory contradicted the teleology, meaning explaining things in terms of purpose, not causes, of evolutionary progress or orthogenesis. He did so by describing a natural mechanism that produces exclusively local adaptation, that being natural selection. He preferred to call his theory descent with modification. Gould says Darwin wouldn't have called his process that, and by that he means evolution, because it was an incredibly radical theory of a naturalistic mechanism, which he calls natural selection, because it yielded only local adaptation. In other words, Darwin wasn't so silly not to recognize that people had inherently progressive notions tied to the word evolution, which is why he would not call it that. And ironically, it was believers who were, commenting about his theory who originally started calling it evolution. Gould suggests the parasite that becomes so morphologically simplified that it's just a bag of reproductive tissues in the interior of its host is no less well adapted than complex us are to our exteriors, and we probably each have a reasonably equal chance of extended geological persistence. That's what the theory's about. So it is inherently not progressive. What it says about variation, it says that variation is not directed. Darwin's theory predates our modern understanding of DNA and population genetics, but he was nevertheless able to draw a connection between variation within a population and differences between species. Perhaps even more significant to his theory, he believed that the source of this variation was undirected. And that's really something I want to talk about. We've brought this up before, and I've said we need to distinguish between the fact of evolution and the theory of evolution. And that's often because you're talking to creationists who will say evolution is just a theory, and so you have to remind them that it's actually a fact. Well, for today's exercise, we're taking the facts of evolution for granted, and we're actually addressing what is radical about Darwin's theory. And so just to make that clear. All right. And so Gold goes on to say, in Platonic traditions, variation is accident, which literally means falling away from the mean or the essence of the thing. Variation is traditionally treated as a set of odd accidents of individual, imperfect incarnations of an inherent essence. And therefore, the essence is central and the variation is mere accident. Darwin completely inverts that. In Darwinian thought, the variation is the essence. What is the essence of the species but the spectrum of its variation, which is available for conversion into evolutionary change? That's a profound change in perception, and it's of great practical importance. And this comes into a lot of our conversations because people with these conventional views, they still try to define, so they find, you hear the word, here's the word, normal. Well, this is normal, and this is a pathology. They want to say, let's take the average human, let's just average up all our traits, and the result, we'll say that's what it means to be normal. And anything, if you're taller than that, well, that's a variation. If you're shorter than that, well, that's a variation. Like, as though the essence is really, like, to think of it in statistical terms, literally, the old way of thinking is that the essence was the mean. What is the average? The average is the most important thing. We need to understand the average, and everything else is, you know, what kind of accidents do you get around the average? And Darwin says, no. The standard deviation is what you want to understand. You need to understand how much variation is in the sample. That's the essence, and it is the spectrum. There's no essential, and this is so important because that means no matter, it's not about how frequent something is, how common something is, how rare something is. If it's human, if it's part of the population, if it's part of our variation, it's part of our essence. And it's a radically different way to think about things. And it really, even to be like, give you one of the things people may not think about is, in some sense, it should change how we do our statistics. Like, right? Like when we do our experimental results, if we're really, really thinking we're going to be hardcore evolutionary biologists, we should be talking about how our results of our experiments affect the variation and what's in that, right? Just as much as we focus on changes in like the mean of a trait and things like that. So there's some practicality there to it, but the real practicality is the theory and thinking and changing how we think philosophically about what it means to be human, or what it means to be any organism, really. All right, so it's not directed. And now we're going to take a couple of quick detours that I think are really, 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 really fun. So I love reading Darwin. Many evolutionary biologists do. He was a tremendous writer, and you're always stumbling across something new and wonderful. There's a passage I'm about to read to you. It's from a very famous letter Darwin wrote to a friend, Asa Gray. Gray, a scientist of devout faith, was having a bit of trouble grappling with the implications of Darwin's theory himself, and he eventually comes to rest on the idea of what we refer to as directed variation, the idea that the ultimate source of variation between organisms was in some way guided towards increasing complexity and ultimately the emergence of Homo sapiens. Darwin reveals highly enlightening aspects of his own intellectual maturation. All right. So he says, with respect to the theological view of the question, this is always painful to me. I am bewildered. I had no intention to write atheistically, but I own that I cannot see as plainly as others do, and as I should wish to do, evidence of design and beneficence on all sides of us. There seems to me too much misery in the world. I cannot persuade myself that a beneficent and omnipotent God would have designedly created the Icumenidae with the express intention of their feeding within the living bodies of caterpillars, or that a cat should play with mice. Not believing this, I see no necessity in the belief that the eye was expressly designed. On the other hand, I cannot anyhow be contented to view this wonderful universe, and especially the nature of man, and to conclude that everything is the result of brute force. I am inclined to look at everything as resulting from design laws, with the details, whether good or bad, left to the working out of what we may call chance. Not that this notion at all satisfies me. All right. And I have that's a great tidbit. Also, something that you may have missed during 2020 and in the pandemic and all that is that the Ichneumonidea as a group were actually renamed the Darwin Wasp. And I just I put this slide here to terrify students, because I always say, like, we have the wrong perspective of insects, right? Like, to us, they're like small and just like kind of maybe a nuisance sometime. But imagine if you were on the scale, right? And you could really see that thing, like, that's a monster. Like, that looks like a demonic creature, and I would be very afraid. And you could definitely make a movie about that thing that made me pee my pants. And so I always loved this creature because it really did get, these are species that, like, they lay their larvae inside of caterpillars and they eat their way out, right? It's a really monstrous process, and this really got Darwin to think very deeply about his faith. So very interesting. And then so Darwin was so sharp and clever in his response, but also clear. By, quote, the details left to chance, he makes his rejection of directed variation clear, however humbly he chose to do so. But the newsy bits you may have missed last year. All right, and that was my note about the Darwin Wasp being renamed. Okay, so here's another little bit that I call radical love, because I always like throw a little something romantic in there. And so this is from a letter Darwin's wife wrote to him, and you can really see how wrestling with this happened in their marriage. So she says, when I am with you, I think all melancholy thoughts keep out of my head. But since you are gone, some sad ones have forced themselves in, of fear that our opinions on the most important subject should differ widely. My reason tells me that honest and conscientious doubts cannot be a sin, but I feel it would be a painful void between us. I thank you from my heart for your openness with me, and I should dread the feeling that you are concealing your opinions from the fear of giving me pain. It is perhaps foolish of me to say this much, but my own dear Charlie, we now do belong to each other, and I cannot help being open with you. Will you do me a favor? Yes, I am sure you will. It is to read our Savior's farewell discourse to his disciples, which begins at the end of the 13th chapter of John. It is so full of love to them and devotion and every beautiful feeling. It is the part of the New Testament I love best. This is a whim of mine. It would give me great pleasure, though I can hardly tell why. I do not wish you to give me your opinion about it. Emma Wedgwood.
Wow. Oh my.
It's just how Christians in our lives is that, right? Like, I need you to just understand God's love and read about, but let's not talk. No.
Yeah.
Don't tell me what you think. Don't tell me what you think. All right.
That is great. Wow.
So, all right, finally, let's get back on track. So the last element is according to Gould, is what it says about historicity, and that is that it's not predictable. Under most what I'm calling more user-friendly notions of evolution, you may still think you can construe it as a predictable sequence. Maybe every little detail isn't predictable. There's a broad kind of progress that is inherent to this day. Most people who exclaim a belief in evolution, who even consider themselves Darwinian, still see it that way. The vernacular understanding of evolution is that it's a process that means increasing complexity. If you can't exactly be sure that Homo sapiens would have emerged, at least something like it is very likely, because that's what evolution means. But Darwinian evolution isn't that. One of the fascinating things that flows from it, it is only about local adaptation, and local adaptation is to immediate environments. Immediate environments are changing essentially on random vectors through geological time, so that even if you have the determination of local adaptation for any moment, since it's a determinism of local adaptation to fluctuating environments that are essentially stochastic through time, it's going to give you a stochastic pattern for the history of life. And therefore, you're stuck in a true Darwinian world. You're going to be stuck with a view of unpredictable history. That's a scary notion that actual history is unpredictably contingent.
I
And
like
so
that.
here we have where I'm now going from what he says in that speech back to a quote from his book, The Wonderful Life, that kind of ties this all together. The old chain of being would provide the greatest comfort, but we now know that the vast majority of, quote, simpler creatures are not human ancestors or even prototypes, but only collateral branches on life's tree. The cone of increasing progress and diversity therefore becomes our iconography of choice. The cone implies predictable development from simple to complex, from less to more. Homo sapiens may form only a twig, but if life moves even fitfully toward greater complexity and higher mental powers, then the eventual origin of self-conscious intelligence may be implicit in all that came before. In short, I cannot understand our continued allegiance to the manifestly false iconographies of ladder and cone, except as a desperate finger in the dike of cosmically justified hope and arrogance. So that is what Gold is about. He is trying to make it very, very clear that that's a lie. And that's why I call it a wonderful lie, that this conventional view that is so comforting to us, that we were inevitable, that natural history moves towards our emergence, that evolution is predictable. This is just simply not how it is. And one thing I always want to share with students about this too is the fact that throughout history, people who have understood this have also been able to recognize the consequences for the real world around them. And so this is one of my favorite quotes. It's from George Gaylord Simpson. He says, biological justification for the totalitarian development of society has been sought in the doctrines of evolutionary fatalism. Regardless of such labels as right, wrong, good, or bad, it has been argued that this is the inevitable future. Mankind is going this way just as horsekind was going towards equus throughout the tertiary. Opposition is as futile and foolish as if the little Eohippus had said, I'm going to be a dinosaur instead of a horse. Even aside from the fact that this is another false use of analogy, it has been shown that a fatalistic view of evolution has little scientific support. So Simpson is writing in 1941 during the time of the Second World War, and during this time, it is being argued of the evolutionary progress of man, that, quote, totalitarianism does seem to be inevitable. So again, the radical interpretation is coming up against the conventional interpretation, and this is well before Gould, and these are very serious issues. So Simpson made a strategic shift from talking about directed evolution to calling out the deterministic reasoning more directly, and that is why he started talking about evolutionary fatalism, because he is trying to tie the conventional view with the totalitarian reasoning that is accompanying it. Right. And that is something I see now a lot in conversations, especially in creation versus evolution conversations, or a lot of times in atheist versus atheist versus Christian conversations, because they will quite often go into morality, right? And they'll start talking about, well, under your view of evolution, nothing's even wrong. And why shouldn't we just, nuke everywhere? And then we just have the power. Like they just, right? And every time it's totalitarian thinking justified by evolutionary fatalism. Sorry, that's not how evolution works, right? But that's the connection, right? They want to misrepresent evolution and then be really, really, really bad people based on that misrepresentation. And so it's important to know that the same way we're calling them out and saying they're misrepresenting evolution, we have a long history of people thinking deeply and accurately about evolution and recognizing this. And so we're sort of taking our place in that history of using an accurate understanding of evolution to fight fascism. Okay, and so here comes the iconography of the radical interpretation, right? So this is how you should view evolution. This is what accurate depictions of evolution look like. So the big one here is the tree of life. It starts down here at the bottom with like, I think over here, maybe you guys can get my thing. So you have like, this is like the both of the earth and we're going out this way, right? So this would be more modern times. And so you see like a thin tree that starts out and you see the decimation and diversification, right? You see all of the branches that are dead ends, essentially, that most of the tree of life is dead ends. And it's also hard to pick out humans, but we're over here somewhere in mammals, right? So it's not human centric. It's not trying to depict the tree of life in a way that makes us super special, that depicts us as the purpose. And so this is something that you see a lot of times, like hanging in the walls of like departments and biology departments or anthropology departments and stuff like that. You'll see this is like kind of a common depiction that we use for the tree of life now. Up here, we have like a sort of branching phylogeny of primates. And down here, we have actually more of like the hominid phylogeny. And again, you see the branching patterns and you can see, rather than it sort of creating the impression that it's all about our emergence, you can see all the dead ends we had in our history and also the contemporaneousness, right? That you have times where there are multiple hominin populations coexisting at different times, right? And so it's a bit messier looking, but this is what people should be thinking when they're thinking of evolutionary relationships, these sort of branching patterns with lots of dead ends and decimation and diversification, as Gould called it. And then, of course, Replaying Life's Tape has actually taken on a life of its own due to experimental evolution. And a lot of you are familiar with Richard Lenski's long-term evolution experiment. It's the longest running evolution experiment in the history of science, and it's often quoted as just that. It's these E. coli populations, and they've been going for over 75,000 generations, and it's really impressive. Well, it is really impressive, but why should anybody care? The reason, people care, the thing that's very interesting, there's a lot of interesting questions that have been addressed with the LTEE, but the most sort of direct one is, how repeatable is evolution? The actual design of the LTEE is that all 12 populations started from a single colony. So they isolated one single genotype and then put it in 12 separate, its own 12 separate worlds, right? And then they've all been evolving in parallel. So they all started for the same exact point in history and the same exact genotype. So it is a replay experiment. And so that's why the LTEE is so famous, is that little things that, like, for instance, the most famous thing that's happened in the LTEE is the emergence of CIT plus in this A-3 lineage. If you notice, it's probably hard to tell, but this flask is much darker than the other ones, or more cloudy, let's say. It's not contaminated. It's that when this population, all these populations, they go through the glucose that's in there very quickly. And one of the populations got the right mutations and actually evolved the ability to eat some of the citrate that was in the medium. It's just like something that's put in there as like a stabilizing agent. And that unleashed a whole new food source from them and much greater population sizes. And so that is actually considered by many people to be a speciation event, because by definition, E. coli growing in these conditions don't metabolize citrate. But that only happened in one of the 12 populations. So what if he only did 6 replays? Maybe you never see that. What if we did 50? Maybe more than one population would evolve it, right? But it didn't happen in every population. That population has a unique history of potentiating mutations that happened before the CYP plus mutants happened. So you can think about that as sort of playing poker, and you've got all the cards you need except for the king or the queen to make a royal flush. And the dealer lays down that king or queen, and boom, you've got the perfect hand. But if you didn't have all those other cards in your hand already, then that king or queen really would do you no good. So that's an example of how replaying the tape of life has been transformed from a metaphor to an actual experimental methodology. And most of my work actually also involves replay experiments, usually with digital populations. And so here's just a quick depiction of the different types of replay experiments that people perform. Up here, this is like the LTEE, where you start with an ancestral clone. It's divided into a bunch of copies. And over evolutionary time, you just freeze samples and you kind of can figure out, how different or repeatable was evolution in these populations. There's also something called analytic replay experiments, which is they take a single population over time, but then they start doing replays from like different times. They've also done this with like the CYP plus. So you go back to a different time point, and then you start making a bunch of different copies, and you can sort of see how the trajectories changed over time. Super, super cool stuff. Most of my stuff fits into this category, which is historical difference experiments, which is you do sort of 2 phases of replay experiments. In the first phase, you use a particular environment, and then the second phase, you use a different environment. And then you're testing to see how the history in the ancestral environment affects evolution in the second or derived environment. And so these are all questions that we can address empirically now. And so they started off as sort of a fantasy for Stephen Jay Gould, but before he died, actually he learned about the LTEE, he wrote about it, visited the lab, he was a huge fan. And there's still a lot of debate and discussion in the literature about historical contingency, and because Gould was talking about macroevolution, like he was talking about big like contingency throughout the tree of life. So how much do these sort of micro examples or digital examples sort of relate to the big patterns of evolution at the much higher levels? So yeah, it's a fun field to be in, but this is science, right? This is what you do. You start with a theory, you figure out how to actually make it realized, and then you see what you can do to mature the field from there. And of course, I love to just end with this. We must remember that biology is the study of life and evolution is its central theory. And this is a quote from Theodosis Dobzhansky from an article of the same name, which is "Nothing in biology makes sense except in light of evolution." I believe the Darwinian revolution is still incomplete and still facing active resistance. While the fact of evolution has seemingly overwhelmed many, although not all of its most ardent resistors, it's the full implications of the theory that we are still struggling to come to grips with. And I hope that this helps you with an understanding of this radical view of life. And thanks for checking this out.
Yay, that was awesome. Oh my gosh, that was so good. Okay,
All right,
well,
we can't
first
hear
of all,
you. We got to make sure we get Sunny back.
You can't hear me? Uh-oh. Wes, can you hear me? I'm going to put up the first
Thanks, gang.
question. So if
All right. Can you
like to
guys
ask
hear Sonny?
how
Is it
does
just me?
impact? Let's see. Wes might be saying something.
Oh, you guys can hear? Why can't I hear? All right, hang on.
That's why. That's why he didn't hear me earlier trying
I
to
can't
get the
hear
question
anything.
in. Uh-oh.
All right, hang on. I'm gonna reload.
All right. While he's reloading, I want to thank all of you who have stayed and watched this. I think that was a fantastic presentation. It kind of got me thinking about some of the wait, he's coming back
All
in.
right, we're good. We're good. We're good. I can hear.
You can hear me now?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
well, just about ready to get into something, but before I do, I wanted to give you a couple questions. It was
Sure.
so funny though, because I was trying to get these questions in earlier and you weren't hearing me.
Oh yeah, I can hear.
That
I'm
was so
sorry
funny.
about
I just
that.
stopped. I'm like, it's okay. This is from Kafai, I think is how you say it. I'd like to ask, how does impact of environment, personal choice, and cultural development affect human behavior, and in turn, societal outcomes within the model? And let me get to the second question. I lost it there. Of evolutionary fatalism.
Oh yeah.
I'm gonna
Well,
put the first part back up. Oop.
so that's sort of the crux of it. For to think about human history, all of those things matter, and all of those things we would say are largely unpredictable. But I don't. But you got to remember. So we're like contrasting, right? So evolutionary fatalism, in some sense, they think that a lot of those things are, they come out in the wash. Like they think these things happen, but they're not trajectory changing. Like they're not enough to change the overall trajectory of history. To be honest, there are some aspects of evolution that are predictable. And so you see this in terms of like convergent evolution, where you have different lineages that evolve similar adaptations when they're facing similar environmental pressures. So that does happen. It's really an empirical question. But certainly when it comes to human behavior, I think that's my overall takeaway from things, is that people need to think about things. And I'm not ever comfortable predicting where we're going because these things matter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Next one is from Logan Fisher. And I know he misspelled this, and I'm not sure
Cladogram.
exactly. There you go, cladogram. What's the best way to view a cladogram of life?
It really shouldn't matter. Like whatever makes the most sense to you. The way you understand a cladogram is if you can mess it all up and it doesn't matter. So, some people still like to depict them going from like left to right so that they're like the time or whatever, like how we read. But really the way they're branched, it shouldn't matter. What I mean by that is like when we do this. So all right, so maybe one of the best ways would be with pipe cleaners. And so one of the things that one of the people I work with, like Louise, does is she does a pipe cleaner exercise where you can depict branching phylogenies using pipe cleaners. And one of the things that's really helpful then to show is you can change how you orient it, and you can invert things and move things around, and it doesn't change the relationships. So that's a really good question. There's lots of different ways to view a good cladogram, but the most accurate way to say it is that if they're accurate, it won't matter. And so then it's just a matter of what styles you like. But what you want to look up is tree thinking. That's the key. So that's the skill now of reading cladograms and phylogenies, is tree thinking. And so if you look into tree thinking, you will find the way various educators approach that, and the pipe cleaners is one of the tricks of the trade.
I want to thank you so much for this presentation because I absolutely loved it. But I think it's interesting that so many. One thing that you said early on was that so many people, even people who believe, who understand that evolution is a thing, it's not,
Yeah,
you
but
know,
it's a fact.
creation.
Yeah,
Exactly. That they still kind of look at it as um, having a goal, and especially that goal being a complexity. And the fact that it's not is so important for us to understand. It really is important to understand. And I just thought I thought it was a really great. Oh,
yeah, it really is. Yeah.
okay. What is your opinion of Terence McKenna's stoned ape theory? Does he think it holds any merit at all, even in minuscule, or does he regard it as entirely bunk? I don't
No, I
know. I
don't. I
haven't read
don't.
that.
I don't regard it as entirely bunk. I think it's like this idea that, like, psychedelic use may be like an important factor driving our, our consciousness and our mental capacities. Um, I just don't think. I don't. Well, I'll say two things. One, I don't think we have enough data realistically, and two, I just you got to remember that evolution happens really on entire populations at once. And so it isn't really selecting on particular components. So it's sort of like what organisms reproduce and which ones don't. So in that sense, it's making selections on our consciousness, our digestion, our mobility, our tool use, our language capacities, our defense capabilities, all at once, right? And so I think you know it's tough to know, especially again because so much of it is tied to what's in the past. So we can do selection experiments now and sort of determine how they impact our fitness and our reproduction and things like that. I definitely think it's an idea that has something to it. So yeah, it just depends. And I will say this to its credit, I think we're learning a lot more about the centrality of maybe like altered states of consciousness or mind alternation in throughout the animal kingdom. So for instance, like there's research about how dolphins get high on pufferfish or whatever, because of the use of
That's
the
cool.
toxins or whatever, right? So um I think overall we might find something that is far deeper than human evolution, that is sort of a relationship between organisms with a certain type of, certainly we would consider like really brainy creatures with, big brains and really complex behavior, and the way they use chemicals to alter those brain states, right? Like it could be way before humans, you know what I mean, to even be the primary driver within hominin evolution. So there's a lot there.
And from Kafai, do you have any theory at all as to how the spider-tailed horned viper's tail was evolved? I've never heard an adequate explanation of how its tail evolved to be the way that it is, the way it is now as we see it.
Nothing about the spider-tailed horned viper, and I don't like snakes. But is it let me I don't even want to look at it. What is a spider tail? Is it a mimicry thing?
I have no idea, but now I really do want to know. We're going to have to look this thing up.
Oh yeah, it's got some gross. Oh yeah, ooh, yeah. I don't know. I don't know. I do not want to run into that thing.
So this question kind of makes me ask a question.
Oh, Ryan wants you to show it.
Okay, hold on. Spider-tailed Horned viper. There we go. Oh my gosh.
Uses it to bait birds. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of mimicry in nature, be it as bait or as defense.
That is.
But I'm like, aren't snakes scary enough? Like, you need to be a snake that also pretends it's a spider. Like, again, just scale. If we were much smaller, you could make so many movies just about regular animals. Yeah, like the anglerfish bait extension.
Every time I try to get a picture, I happen to click one that you have to like pay to get it pulled up. Oh well. Okay. We will just let that go.
Here's a picture.
Y'all just have to look it up. It's like
I think I got it. There we go. Can you share that?
Okay. Yep. Here
Boom,
yes, that was yes. There was another picture somewhere else that was similar to that, and I couldn't get it to pull up. So
I do not want to run into that thing.
My gosh, that is an ugly looking
Western
thing.
Iran, yeah, that thing's
Wow.
scary looking. That thing is scary looking.
So okay, so we've gone over, and I want to be respectful of your time. So what do you think is kind of something to kind of wrap all of that up? What is a main thing that you are wanting everyone to take away from this?
Definitely just contingency. That literally the future depends on the past, and the future that we create depends on what we do now, and there is no fate out there waiting for us. And all of the things that we're doing in our lifetime are of tremendous consequence. It matters if we address climate change or not. If we address it, a different future awaits us than if we don't address it. It matters who becomes the next, leader of the free world. I don't care who it is, but we're just telling people, like, these are the type of decisions that change on a mass scale what options will be open to us down the road, what future, the future generations will inherit. So the main lesson to take away of addressing evolutionary fatalism is that it is a wonderful lie, that it's comforting to think that there's only so much you can do. And, people say things like the arc of history bends towards justice, right? That's something me and my friend Stephanie Helms talk about, people saying that. And she's always reminding people, but yeah, you got to bend the bow, right? It doesn't bend towards history without you bending it, right? And that's the contingency. Right. You have to make those steps to create the future you want. We can't just sit back and expect it to happen because there's some naturalistic law that's just going to usher us towards a grand future without us doing the work. So that would be my main takeaway, is that we are really authoring our story as we live it.
I like that. That was excellent. So if you guys all liked this show as much as I did, thank you so much, Jay. You can subscribe, hit the bell, all those great things. But if you would like to, you might want to become a patron. I want to thank our current patrons: Karen Butcher, Puck, Helen Green, Logan Fisher, Amanda McLeod, Eric Ozols, Rion, Deneen Murphy, Dan D, Michael Wiseman, me, Aaron Coalson, and Phil Calderone. You guys are the ones that keep the cream in our coffee. We love you guys very much. Thank you so much. Also, don't forget to check out our other shows on Skeptic Haven. On Tuesdays, we have Secular Soapbox. Of course, Thursdays are Here With Me. Then Saturdays, we have the Global Atheist and Women Atheist Unload. And then on Sundays, we have Let's Talk. Now, we also have a new show. Yes.
Yeah. Black Free Thinkers. There we go. Mondays. There we go. The Black Free Thinkers. We're in there. All right. So we'll see you guys. Not this coming Monday, but next Monday. Yep.
Y'all have got to check that out. It's a very, very excellent show.
Right here
So
on Skeptic Haven. Yes, yes.
that's right, right here on Skeptic Haven.
Shout out to Maya and Durante and Cynthia for hosting that with me. Also, y'all, I'm at Pocket Locker 86. Come give us a sub and check us out.
Yeah, in the live chat, there was a hashtag going on about get you to, I don't remember if it's 1,000, to 10,000.
Yeah, to
I remember what it was.
1,000. Yeah, I'm almost getting close to 1,000. Yeah, come help me get to 1,000. Also, we've got a little virtual headquarters where we hang out called Gather. I know PC probably dropped a link for that. That's definitely where we'll be at for the after party if you guys want to come hang out. And then also, Wes put links in the descriptions if you want to go see the previous Evolution episodes that I did on here with Sunny. So check those out.
We've had a great time, haven't we?
Yeah, it's been a good series.
Yes, it has. And I just want to thank you so much because I've had so much fun with you, and I've also learned a lot, especially today. I was just absorbing it. I'm going to have to go back and watch it like 3 times.
I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And meanwhile, for everyone else, if you like science, if you maybe you're a scientist and you're thinking, I'd like to sit right where Jay's sitting, contact the show. And you will find the link down below on how to contact us. And I would love to have you on if you are interested. Also, if you are wanting to help us at Skeptic Haven, be sure and contact us at westdstartevent at gmail.com. We can use you for anything. We have bookers and, well, just all kinds of stuff. So if you are wanting to help, get a hold of us. We'd like to have it. Absolutely. It's a lot of fun here. We have a lot of fun.
We do have a lot of fun at Skeptic Haven. So definitely consider volunteering.
So in the meantime, as we wait for next week, everyone always think critically. Good night, everybody.
Said I'm gone.
Our being knows this is where we came from. We long to return. And we can, because the cosmos is also within us. We're made of star stuff. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself. If we are not able to ask skeptical questions, to interrogate those who tell us that something is true, to be skeptical of those in authority, then we're up for grabs for the next charlatan, political or religious, who comes ambling along.